At dark, the night of terror began. As the signal officers of Sherman's divisions shot off rockets in standard practice to show their locations, fires began to break out all over the city and neighborhoods. Soldiers carried pots and vessels of turpentine, kerosene, or other flammable liquid in which they dipped balls of cotton, lit them, and flung the fireballs over and under houses. The troops charged with patrolling the streets did nothing to stop the rioting.
The streets were crowded with murdering groups of demons from all the corps in the army. David Cunningham.
The boys were spreading the conflagration by firing the city in 100 places. Captain S.H.M. Byers.
Universal license to burn and plunder was the order of the day. Union officer Thomas G. Myers.
Such an awful sight. The street filled with a throng of men, drunken, dancing, shouting, cursing wretches, everyone bearing a tin torch or a blazing lightwood knot. The sky, so dark a half hour before, was already glowing with light, and flames were rising in every direction. Harriet H. Ravenel.
Sherman, who had just finished supper at his headquarters, stepped out into the yard, saw the darkness lit up with the lurid hue of conflagration, and remarked, "They have brought it on themselves." Generals Howard and Hazen went quickly into the streets, ordering soldiers to help fight the fire. Sherman joined them much later in the effort.
True. Generals Sherman, Howard, and others were out giving instructions for putting out a fire in one place, while 100 fires were lighting all around them. How much better would it have been had they brought in a division or brigade of sober troops, cleared out the town, even with steel and bullet. David Cunningham.
The fierce wind, which had been blowing since about 2 that afternoon, was helping to spread the fire, making a tornado of flame. Most efforts to stop the fire were futile. However, the area around General Howard's headquarters, including the buildings on the college campus being used as hospitals, was saved by the work of Union soldiers and hospital workers. Pillaging continued throughout the city. Women and men, black and white, were robbed of their valuables at gun and knife point. Black women were raped. Soldiers pulled children about their beds while plunging long knives repeatedly between them into the mattresses, looking for hidden treasures. Outside, hundreds of men were probing the ground with their bayonets or iron ramrods, searching for buried treasures.
Such a scene. Drunken soldiers rushing from house to house, emptying them of their valuables, and then firing them. David Cunningham.
A crowd had burst in and spread themselves over everything. And from that time until morning, a roaring stream of drunkards poured through the house, plundering and raging, and yet in a way curiously civil and abstaining from personal insult. Harriet H. Ravenel.
The streets were now also full of terrified women, children, and old men, seeking safety in the park, lunatic asylum, and other open places to avoid the devouring fire.
Many wandered about, wringing their hands and crying. Some sat stolid and speechless in the street, watching everything that they had go to destruction. Captain S.H.M. Byers.
Shrieks, groans, and cries of distress resounded from every side. Men, women, and children, some half naked as they rushed from their beds, were running frantically about. David Cunningham.
It was a most fearful night. The illumination was more brilliant than I am able to describe. Not only the glare of the flames, but the millions of sparks and cinders that filled the air all helped to make an illumination that far surpassed the brightness of day. The storm of fire raged with unabated fury. James Gibbs.
At about 11 p.m., the students and most of the nuns at the Ursuline convent fled to a nearby church.
We marched through the blazing streets with the precision of a military band. Father O'Connell led the procession, a crucifix held high above his head. The main body of nuns followed, then the pupils, the smaller between the larger for protection. Not a cry, not a moan. Even the drunken soldiers seemed silenced for a little while by this grand sight of church triumphant over war, the roaring of the fire, the scorching flames on either side as we marched down Blanding Street. Sarah Aldrich Richardson.
Midnight came, and a brigade of Union troops south of the city was finally sent into the streets to arrest disorderly soldiers and citizens. About 2,500 men were arrested, including officers of nearly every grade. Because he did not have a pass, even Captain Byers, who had been helping a family escape the fire, was taken into custody. Other soldiers, like Private Arbuckle, who was aiding citizens in the street reach safety, were allowed to remain in the city to help. Yet the pillaging and burning continued by men ruder and fiercer. The guards assigned to the Ursuline convent began their own rampage of the building, forcing the remaining nuns to leave. Fire was falling so thick that it burned the veils and dresses of the nuns on their way to join their sisters in the graveyard of the church nearby.
About 2:00 in the morning, the house behind ours and the one across the street burnt down, and ours seemed in such danger that we took the 4 little children, whom we had kept in bed, and my mother took them across the street into the Academy Square, where many burnt-out people had taken refuge. Harriet H. Ravenel.
About 3 a.m., the cross above the convent fell, and an hour later the winds subsided. Then, with the light, reveille sounded, and the soldiers remaining in the city immediately returned to their ranks.